but after making 27 films together across 43 years, yeah.
Steven Spielberg and Harrison Ford created movie magic together. From Raiders of the Lost Ark to E.T., they seemed unstoppable. But behind the scenes, a storm was brewing. It started with creative differences, escalated with Kingdom of the Crystal Skull, and ended in complete silence. Today, we uncover why Spielberg never forgave Ford and the shocking reason they haven't spoken since. Steven Spielberg was born on December 18, 1946, in Cincinnati, Ohio, into a Jewish family with deep Ukrainian roots. His father, Arnold, was an electrical engineer working on early computers, while his mother, Leah, was a concert pianist who later became a restaurant owner. Both of them came from families of Jewish immigrants who had fled Ukraine, carrying stories of survival that would one day shape Spielberg's films. His childhood was anything but steady. Because of his father's work, the family moved constantly, from Cincinnati to New Jersey and then to Arizona. Every move meant starting over, and being one of the only Jewish kids in mostly non-Jewish neighborhoods made things even harder. He felt embarrassed by his family's Orthodox traditions, and school wasn't any easier. Bullies made sure of that. They called him names, threw pennies at him, and even wrote insults on his locker. Some classmates would sneeze a Jew when they walked past him. It was cruel. He hated standing out. At one point, he even started telling people his last name was German instead of Jewish just to avoid being targeted. He carried that shame for years until he grew older and realized it was something to be proud of. Through all of this, there was one thing that made him feel alive: filmmaking. It started when he was 12. He borrowed his father's 8mm camera and made a short Western film called The Last Gunfight to earn a Boy Scout photography badge. It was supposed to be a small project, but something about it clicked. He loved it. He was hooked. By 13, he had made Escape to Nowhere, a 40-minute war film inspired by the World War II stories his father told him. He didn't have fancy equipment, so he got creative, using flour-filled boards to fake explosions. The film ended up winning first place in a statewide competition. It was his first taste of recognition. At 17, he went even bigger. He directed his first feature-length movie, Firelight, a sci-fi story about alien encounters. The budget was a mere $500, but he made it work, using clever tricks like superimposing glowing spaceships onto the film by layering exposures. It was rough, but the ideas were there: themes of mystery, wonder, and broken families. The kind of stories he would later perfect in movies like Close Encounters of the Third Kind. He premiered Firelight at a local theater, selling tickets for $1 each. At the end of the night, after selling 500 tickets, he counted the earnings, a total profit of $1. It wasn't much, but to Spielberg, it was proof. Proof that people would show up to watch something he had created. Steven Spielberg's journey into Hollywood started with a short film called Amblin, a 26-minute, dialogue-free movie he made in 1968. It wasn't just any student film, it was the key that unlocked the doors of Hollywood for him. With a tiny budget of $15,000, Spielberg created a simple yet deeply symbolic story about a young man and woman hitchhiking through the Mojave Desert during the hippie era. The film's quiet, intimate moments slowly reveal a deeper message. While the man seems like a free spirit at first, the contents of his guitar case, items like a tie, deodorant, and toothpaste, show he's not as carefree as he pretends to be. This subtle commentary on identity and societal expectations struck a chord with audiences and critics. What makes Amblin even more fascinating is how Spielberg pulled it off. He was only 21 when he directed it and chose to shoot on 35mm film, a bold and expensive choice for someone just starting out. The film relied entirely on visual storytelling, using expressive cinematography and music instead of dialogue to create an emotional experience. This showed Spielberg's natural talent for telling stories through the camera alone. The impact of Amblin was immediate. Sidney Sheinberg, a top executive at Universal Television, saw the film and was so impressed that he offered Spielberg a 7-year directing contract. At just 22, Spielberg became the youngest filmmaker to sign such a deal with a major studio. The name Amblin stuck with him. Years later, he used it for his production company, Amblin Entertainment, which would go on to create classics like E.T. and Back to the Future. After landing his Universal contract, Spielberg sharpened his skills by directing TV episodes. One of his earliest major gigs was directing Columbo's first episode, Murder by the Book, in 1971. At just 24, he gave the detective series an unforgettable Hitchcock-style treatment, using creative camera angles and suspenseful pacing. The episode became one of the most famous in the series and proved that Spielberg had a talent for turning television into something cinematic. But Spielberg's real breakthrough came later that year with Duel, a made-for-TV movie that became a sensation. Based on a short story by Richard Matheson, Duel is about a traveling salesman who finds himself hunted by a faceless truck driver on a desolate highway. It sounds simple, but Spielberg transformed it into a nerve-wracking thriller. He used low-angle shots to make the truck seem like a looming monster and relied on sound design to build almost unbearable tension. Despite being made for TV, Duel looked and felt like a full-fledged movie, leading to its theatrical release in Europe. The film was a hit, earning Spielberg critical acclaim and cementing his reputation as one of Hollywood's most exciting new directors. Nobody expected a 28-year-old kid named Steven Spielberg to change Hollywood forever, but in 1975, he did exactly that with Jaws. What started as a simple thriller about a killer shark turned into a box office monster that rewrote the rules of filmmaking. Before Jaws, movies didn't have massive nationwide releases, and summer wasn't even considered a good season for movies. That all changed when Spielberg's terrifying Great White Shark hit theaters, becoming the first film to ever make $100 million in the U.S. It didn't stop there. By the end of its run, Jaws had raked in an unbelievable $470 million worldwide. But here's the crazy part, this film almost didn't work. The mechanical shark was a disaster. It kept breaking down, looking more like a floating bathtub than a bloodthirsty predator. Instead of scrapping the movie, Spielberg made a bold decision: he barely showed the shark at all. Instead, he let the audience feel its presence through suspense and music. That's where John Williams's haunting two-note theme came in. Just two simple notes, dun-dun, instantly triggered fear. Spielberg later compared it to Alfred Hitchcock's style, where fear comes from the unknown, not from what's shown on screen. Beyond the scares, what made Jaws a true game-changer was how it was released. Back then, movies didn't launch in hundreds of theaters all at once. Studios would test them in a few cities, then expand if they performed well. Universal flipped the script. They spent a then insane $700,000 on TV ads and blasted Jaws into 409 theaters on the same day. The result? Instant hype. People lined up around the block, and just like that, the summer blockbuster was born. With Jaws, Spielberg had conquered Hollywood, but he wasn't done yet. 2 years later, he went even bigger, with Aliens. In 1977, he released Close Encounters of the Third Kind, a film that was completely different from other sci-fi movies of the time. While most alien stories played on Cold War fears of invasion, Spielberg took a different route. Instead of terrifying monsters from space, his aliens were mysterious, even peaceful. Back in 1977, Steven Spielberg and George Lucas were relaxing on a beach in Hawaii. Lucas had just released Star Wars, and Spielberg was dreaming about directing a James Bond movie. But Lucas had something better, an idea for a swashbuckling archaeologist named Indiana Smith. Spielberg liked it but thought Smith sounded too plain. Let's call him Indiana Jones instead, and just like that, one of Hollywood's greatest heroes was born. With the name settled, the real challenge began, building a story around this adventurous character. Lucas and Spielberg teamed up with screenwriter Lawrence Kasdan to bring Indiana Jones to life. They wanted the film to feel like the classic action serials of the 1930s and 40s, fast-paced, full of danger, and packed with adventure. That's when filmmaker Philip Kaufman suggested the perfect treasure for Indy's first quest, the Ark of the Covenant. By 1980, Everything was ready for Raiders of the Lost Ark, except for one major detail: who would play Indiana Jones? The first choice wasn't Harrison Ford, it was Tom Selleck. He even got the role, but just as things were coming together, Selleck had to back out because of his commitment to the TV show Magnum P.I. Suddenly, they needed a new Indy. Spielberg immediately thought of Ford, but Lucas was hesitant. He didn't want Ford to become his go-to guy after already casting him as Han Solo in Star Wars. But in the end, Ford won the role, promising to make Indy his own, and he delivered. One of Ford's most legendary moments on set happened in Tunisia. The script called for an intense fight scene between Indiana and a master swordsman, but Ford was sick with dysentery and too exhausted for the long, choreographed sequence. Frustrated, he turned to Spielberg and asked, "Why don't I just shoot the guy?" Spielberg laughed and agreed. The result? One of the most iconic and hilarious moments in movie history, completely unscripted. From the start, Ford wasn't just playing Indiana Jones, he became him. Spielberg gave him the freedom to shape the character, and that trust paid off. When Raiders of the Lost Ark hit theaters on June 12, 1981, it was an instant sensation. Audiences couldn't get enough. The film made $389 million worldwide, proving that adventure movies were far from dead. Steven Spielberg directed all 4 original Indiana Jones films: Raiders of the Lost Ark, Temple of Doom, The Last Crusade, and Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. Each film had a different tone. Raiders of the Lost Ark set the blueprint for adventure movies. Temple of Doom was dark, partly because Spielberg and Lucas were both going through rough personal times. Then, The Last Crusade lightened things up, bringing in Indy's father, played by Sean Connery, and shifting the focus to their rocky relationship. Spielberg saw it as a story about fathers and sons, which made it more than just another action film. By the time Kingdom of the Crystal Skull came around, Spielberg wasn't even sure he wanted to do it. He only agreed out of loyalty to Lucas and love for the character. But Indiana Jones wasn't just Spielberg's creation, it was Harrison Ford's too. At first, Ford wasn't sure about taking the role. He worried Indy might just feel like another version of Han Solo, so he worked with Spielberg and Lucas to make the character different, smarter, more rugged, and, most importantly, human. Ford didn't want Indy to be some untouchable hero. He needed to struggle, get hurt, and think his way out of problems, not just fight his way through them. Ford insisted on playing an aging Indy in Kingdom of the Crystal Skull exactly as he was: gray hair, wrinkles, everything. He didn't want to pretend Indy hadn't aged. He wanted audiences to see that even older heroes still have adventures left in them. Spielberg trusted Ford completely, even letting him do many of his own stunts. That trust came at a cost. Ford got hurt a lot. In Raiders, a plane ran over his leg, tearing his ACL. In Temple of Doom, he messed up his back so badly he needed surgery. But he refused to let a stunt double take over. The bruises, the limping, that was all real, and it made Indy feel real too. Of course, not everything went smoothly behind the scenes. One of the biggest fights happened during Kingdom of the Crystal Skull. George Lucas was obsessed with the idea of aliens in the story. Ford and Spielberg were not happy. Ford even told Lucas, "No way am I being in a Steven Spielberg movie like that." Spielberg was also hesitant since he had already made E.T. and Close Encounters of the Third Kind. But Lucas wouldn't back down. They compromised by making the aliens part of an ancient legend instead of little green men from outer space. Fans were still divided, but at that point, Spielberg had done his part. He made it feel like an Indiana Jones movie, even if the story was controversial. Meanwhile, Harrison Ford isn't just Indiana Jones or Han Solo. He's also the reason E.T. the Extraterrestrial even happened the way it did. And yet, most people don't even know he played a crucial role behind the scenes. In 1980, Steven Spielberg was in Tunisia filming Raiders of the Lost Arkansas. At the same time, he had another story in his head, one about a lost alien and a lonely boy. He knew he wanted to make it, but there was a problem: he didn't have a script. Then, a lucky coincidence. Ford's girlfriend at the time, Melissa Matheson, was on set. She was a talented screenwriter, famous for The Black Stallion. Spielberg saw an opportunity and pitched E.T. to her, hoping she'd write the script. But she turned him down. Screenwriting was exhausting, and she had stepped away from it. Spielberg wasn't one to give up. He turned to Ford and asked for help. Ford, knowing how much Spielberg believed in this story, stepped in. He convinced Matheson to give it another shot. So Spielberg pitched it again, this time with more heart, more emotion, and it worked. Right there in the Tunisian desert, Matheson changed her mind. That decision led to one of the most famous scripts in Hollywood history. She captured Spielberg's vision perfectly, and her work earned her an Oscar nomination. Without Ford, E.T. might never have been made. But Ford's involvement didn't stop there. He even had a scene in the movie, but you've never seen it. Spielberg cast him as Elliot's school principal. The scene took place after Elliot's frog rescuing stunt in biology class. Ford's character gives Elliot a serious lecture about responsibility, completely unaware that E.T.'s psychic connection is making Elliot levitate in his chair. But here's the twist: Spielberg didn't show Ford's face. He wanted to keep the story from a kid's perspective, where adults were just background noise. And yet, after all that, the scene was cut. Spielberg felt it slowed down the film. So, even one of Hollywood's biggest stars couldn't escape the editing room. The footage stayed hidden for years, only surfacing later in special releases. For Henry Thomas, the young actor who played Elliot, meeting Ford on set was unforgettable. In the 1990s, Steven Spielberg was unstoppable. He dominated both special effects and deep emotional storytelling, proving that a director could master both spectacle and substance.